All right, so what I am going to do now is I'm going to walk through some examples of how to do the premise assignment. I did this a little bit in the other lecture, but I want to give you more details and also address some things that I've been seeing in the premise assignments so far. This is a different example. This isn't one that you will be working on for your premise assignment, but it will give you an idea of how to work with things. So, when we are trying to um, represent an argument that is given to us, like the one that you see on the screen right now, the first thing that you want to do is think to yourself, what is the main conclusion that they're getting at? So I'm going to read this and then we're going to ask that question. Animal cruelty is wrong, and this means that benefiting someone who is hurting animals needlessly is wrong too. But when we buy meat at the supermarket, this is benefiting farms that do things like cut off the beaks of chickens so they don't peck at the backs of other chickens because they are in cages with no room, chickens right in front of chickens in cages. There's a typo there. The beaks have a lot of nerve endings, which means cutting it off hurts a lot, and they don't give the chickens painkillers when, another typo, when they do it. If we're not supposed to help people who hurt animals like this, then we should not, another typo, we should not buy meat at supermarkets or at restaurants. Now, like I said, we need to think to ourselves, what is the main thing that this person wants us to believe at the end of their argument? And the main thing in this case is they want people to stop buying meat. You can see at the end, conclusions are not always at the end, but maybe about more than 50% of the time they are. Excuse me. The conclusion here is we should not buy meat at supermarkets or restaurants. And if you want, you can write that out word for word, or you can change it slightly. Um, the conclusion is going to be, therefore, we should not buy meat at supermarkets or at restaurants. Notice how I added the word therefore in front. This is the conclusion. This is hopefully what we're going to end with when we are summarizing the argument of this person. And now we need to use the rules of logic to get to this conclusion. So the first point that I'm trying to make is that you need to identify the main conclusion. That's the first point that some people aren't doing. The second thing that people are struggling with when it comes to representing arguments, right now we're not talking about arguments that you make in response. We are only talking about trying your best to accurately and faithfully represent another person's argument, even if you disagree with it, even if you really don't like it and it makes you angry. We first, even if that's the case, we want to do our best to represent the person. Okay, so first thing, identify the conclusion. The second thing, and this is a big pointer, this is a big tip for you all, is that no matter what you write, even if you feel like it's not representing the argument correctly, no matter what you write, make sure that what you write fits the form of a logical rule exactly. Make sure that you're doing either modus ponens or modus tollens or hypothetical syllogism or disjunctive syllogism. And once you think this is the rule that I'm using, make sure that it fits that form. Because if what you write doesn't fit that form, that's when points really start to come off, quite a bit of points, in fact. So This assignment is making you fit through a narrow door, and it's the narrow door of making sure that your arguments have the right structure so that they work the way that arguments and reason and logic are supposed to work. And that's why I've given you these 4 rules just to keep it simple. All of these 4 rules are good rules. If what you write doesn't fit one of these rules, um, it is very likely a fallacy, though not necessarily, and therefore you are counted off. Okay, so the second thing I'm trying to get across is make sure that what you write fits the form of a rule exactly. Even if you feel like you're not really saying what the person is saying, the main thing, the first thing is to get it to fit in the form of a rule exactly. So how are we going to do that here? Um, well, there's lots of ways that you could do it, but I'm going to give you how I would do it. I would say something like this: animal cruelty is wrong. Excuse me. And here's another point too. Um, you want to make sure that your A's and B's and C's, those are variables that anything can fit into. You want to make sure that those things match. And the way that you're going to do that here is you're going to copy and paste. So notice how that's what I'm doing right now. And you can go back and make sure that you fix any typos if you want, but that's not super important. Animal cruelty is wrong, that's a premise. And here's another premise. If animal cruelty is wrong, then helping those who are hurting animals needlessly is also wrong. Now right there, that's modus ponens, so you could put in a conclusion if you wanted to, and you want to copy and paste. Right now, you're copying and pasting the B. If A, then B, A, therefore B. Modus ponens, 1 and 2. We haven't numbered the premises yet, but we can. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, let's keep going. If premise 3 is correct, then copy and paste the wording exactly. So this is where I'm ultimately headed. What you see selected right now, that's where I'm ultimately headed. So I'm going to copy that, I'm going to paste it, and now what you have is modus ponens again using 3 and 4. This is a way, it's not the only way, but it is a way that you could represent, excuse me, what this argument is saying. Another thing you could do, notice how we did not use the example of the chickens and what they do to chickens without painkiller. If you wanted to add that, then you could do something like this. We would have to change the numbers a little bit. If 3 and if chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, then, and you could add, and if this is where we get our meat from, then we should not buy meat at supermarkets or restaurants. And then we would need to add an extra premise, and we would say something like, we have to affirm it. This is modus ponens. Chickens are kept, and so we want to copy and paste. Chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully. And we're going to take the if out of there, but for now, copy and paste. Chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, and this is where we get our meat from. You could even add here, just to make it obvious, 3 and chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, and this is where we get our meat from. And now what you're doing is you're taking this. All of this right here is the A that you're repeating over again. Remember, your A's and B's have to line up, and I've copied and pasted this word for word so that we're following what I'm saying to you right now. And now we would just add here, we would call this 6, and then what we would say instead of citing these premises, we would say 4 and 5. All right, so the main points I want you to understand when you're representing an argument is that you should identify the conclusion, the main conclusion, copy and paste it, put the word therefore in front of it so that you know that's where I'm headed, that's where I need to get to. Then, in order to get there, whatever you do, you need to make sure that what you're doing fits the form of a logical rule. Even if, let's say that all I had was this. Let's say I only had this, and I'm thinking, I don't know. I mean, like, it seems like this person is trying to say that we should um, not buy meat at the supermarkets, and my argument isn't saying that right now, but I don't know how to make it say that. Don't start just adding sentences that you're not sure how they're matching a logical rule, because then you'll be marked down a lot in terms of points. What you know, if all you have on the screen is this, you know this fits the form exactly. This fits the form of modus ponens exactly. So I know this is good in terms of logical form, even though it may not represent the argument correctly. And if I can't figure out how to move forward, I'm going to turn this in, and that will be better than making a mistake in logical rules. And of course, you can ask me for help. I'll give you comments. If you don't understand those comments, you can talk to me. I'm totally available to email or even do phone calls with you guys. All right, so let's get this back up. And now what we're going to do is we are going to discuss what to do if you are responding to an argument. A lot of the stuff we've already done, we're going to repeat, but it's a little different when you're responding to an argument, when you're arguing against an argument or arguing in favor. Remember that if you are arguing for or against this argument, you cannot argue for or against the conclusions. Anytime something has the word therefore and a citation of a rule and premises, you just know, okay, that's off limits. I can't argue for that or against it. Why am I doing that? Because it's not just me being nitpicky. It is because when we're listening to what people say, even if we think we have a good argument for their conclusion or against their conclusion, but especially when we disagree with them, if we argue against their conclusion, but we don't interact with the argumentation that they put forward, that's not really being respectful to them. It's not showing them that we've listened to them. It's not interacting with the substance of their argument. So what I'm making you do is, if you want to argue for or against, you have to interact with the substance of the person's argument, which means that you are limited to arguing for or against either 1 or 2 or 4 or 5. So how can we do that? Let me see here. Some people might be able to argue against 5. Not everyone is going to be able to argue against 5, but I'll give you an example of arguing against 5. Most people would probably want to argue against 4. And I can give you an example of both. Let's first do 5. If you want to argue against premise 5, this is a very key point right now. Copy and paste. Copy and paste. That's our mantra. So we come down here, we copy and paste, and we're arguing against 5. And right now we've copied and pasted 5, so that would be arguing for 5. So what we need to do is we need to say, therefore, since this is going to be our conclusion, therefore, it is not the case that 3 and chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, and this is where we get our meat from. Okay, what you're denying is all of this. You're denying 5. So you're saying, therefore, it is not the case that, and then copy and paste premise 5. So here's something that some of you could say this, but probably not most of you. You could say, I get my my chicken meat from a farm that treats them well. Okay? And, sorry, hold on. Not if, I get my chicken meat from a farm that treats them well. If, and now copy and paste again, because you're trying to make all the A's and B's line up. If I get my chicken meat from a farm that treats them well, then, and now you're going to copy and paste everything in the conclusion, including it is not the case that. It is not the case that premise 3 and chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, and this is where we get our meat from. This is the part you're denying right here. This is the part that you say, well, that's false. So I'm showing how premise 5 is false, at least for me. And then the rest of it is fairly straightforward. You just put in your numbers. You put in your citation, modus ponens, 7 and 8. Let me just say something about that too. All of this, even though it has a negation, which is this right here, let me just highlight this for us in bold. That's a negation. But all of it is in the B slot for modus ponens. So that's why it shows up again here in the B slot for modus ponens as well. The A slot also matches word for word. And this is why it is modus ponens. So the B is a variable. Anything can be put in the B slot so long as you make all of your B's line up. If you are going to argue against B, which you couldn't do with our rules because that would be the conclusion, but just to kind of help you see, let's say B was something really long, really complex, but it's all B. If you were going to argue against it, you would just put, it is not the case that, and then copy and paste that big long sentence, which is B. All right, let's give another example. Let's go ahead and argue against premise 4. Same thing, if you're going to argue against it, copy and paste it. Once you copy and paste it, put therefore, it is not the case that in front of it. You would have to take out the ifs. 3 and chickens are kept in cages, and this is where we get our meat from. Let's see. Actually, I apologize. That was a mistake on my part. Hold on just a second. Let me undo that. The ifs need to be kept in because what you're doing is you are arguing against the conditional. You are saying that this conditional that you see selected is false. That is why you have "it is not the case that" in front of it. All right, so how can we argue against a conditional? What you can say is something like this. Let's give this argument. Even if, now you're going to copy and paste all of this content, even if 3 and even if chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, and even if this is where we get our meat from, if it is also true that me buying meat doesn't, well, let's say me buying meat hardly affects the quality of those animals' lives, then it is not the case that, copy and paste that whole thing and paste it down. And now what we're going to do is put in our numbers so it's a little easier to see what's going on. Let me get everything that I need first. Three, and chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, and this is where we get our meat from. But it is also true that me buying meat hardly affects the quality of those animals' lives. Okay. So here's, I mean, this is obviously it's, you're kind of putting in a lot of words, but really what we're doing here makes quite a bit of sense. All you're saying is that, yeah, like even if it's true that helping those who are hurting animals needlessly is wrong, even if that's true, even if chickens are, put through a lot of pain by way of like factory farms, and even if I get my meat from these factory farms, even if all that's true, it doesn't necessarily matter, because if I buy my meat there from these supermarkets, or if I stop doing it, it's not going to affect the lives of these animals anyway. They're still going to be in these factory farms. It's still going to be incredibly painful for them. None of the animals that would have died are going to die less or die with less pain. That's what you're saying. It's a pretty straightforward point. But what you're doing is you're putting it into this step-by-step process. You're saying, even if all that's true, but if it's also true that what I'm doing doesn't affect these animals' lives that much, then it would not be the case that if all of that stuff is true, then we should not buy meat at supermarkets. Because if I stop or if I keep buying meat, it's not affecting stuff that much. So why should I therefore stop buying meat at supermarkets? And then what you do is you just affirm everything from modus ponens. Yes, 3 is true. Yes, chickens are kept in cages painfully. Yes, this is where I get my meat from in the supermarket. But it's also true that me buying meat hardly affects the lives of these animals. You're just affirming everything from modus ponens that was in the if-then here up here in 7. And then you have it is not the case that. That's where you're ultimately headed to. All right. So let me now give you an example of agreeing. Agreeing with an argument is probably easier. Let me see here. What can we agree with? Yeah, let's go ahead and agree with 4. I'm trying to think how I might do it. Yeah, let's go ahead and agree with 4. So if you're going to agree with a premise, again, you start off by copying and pasting. But in this case, because you're not disagreeing, you just say therefore, whoops, and then that's it, because that's the premise that you're supporting. So that's where you're going to end. You're going to give an argument for 4. Notice how up here, 4, premise 4 is just assumed. You're just saying it in 4. But if you start to break it down, what you're going to do now is you're going to give more reason to believe in 4 that isn't present in the original argument. How can we do that? One thing that we can say is something like this. Put it like this. It's wrong to let's participate in practices that are cruel, even if you are not causing harm. For example, if I bought a lamp made from human skin and bone of a person who was tortured and killed, I am not hurting that person, especially if nothing like that is happening anymore. But it is still wrong to associate myself with it or participate in what happened. Okay? What's going to happen here, notice how I'm using modus ponens a lot. Modus ponens is used a lot. Modus tollens, probably second place. Hypothetical syllogism, if you want to string together a whole bunch of if-thens, that's when that's used. And usually after hypothetical syllogism, you usually use modus ponens or modus tollens after that. You rarely have hypothetical syllogism all by itself, but sometimes you do. Excuse me. This is going to be modus ponens again. So this right here is my A, okay, the variable A. Notice, just like I said, you can have a ton of stuff that A signifies. Everything is just kind of being put into that A slot. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say if A, then the premise that we want, the place that we're going to, the conclusion that we want. Now, we can't just leave it at A, Since this is the A slot, we're just going to put all of that in there. Copy and paste. Now that's a lot of words. Sometimes something I like to do that you do not have to do, but it helps kind of see what's going on, is I put some little wedges there. So if it's wrong to participate in practices that are cruel, even if you are not causing harm, for example, um, if I bought a lamp made from human skin and bone of a person who was tortured and killed, I'm not hurting that person, especially if nothing like that is happening anymore, but it is still wrong to associate myself with it or participate in what happened. So if all of that's true, if it's wrong to participate in practices that are cruel, even if you're not causing harm, that you can see by way of this example, then if, going back up to 3, if helping those who are hurting animals needlessly is also wrong, and if chickens are kept in cages with their beaks cut off painfully, and if this is where we get our meat from, then we should not buy meat at supermarkets or restaurants, right? I mean, that makes sense. We're participating, we're associating with it. Even though we're not necessarily harming the chickens, maybe by buying it, we're not contributing to the harm, like barely at all, maybe like 0.00003%. But still, we're associating with it. We're participating it in some way. Okay, and then you would just need to put in your numbers at the very end. 7, 8, and 9, and then you cite your rule, modus ponens, 7 and 8. I hope, so the main takeaway is that when you're arguing against a premise, you copy and paste it, you put the word therefore, and because you're arguing against it, you say therefore, it is not the case that blank. And then the whole question is, once again, how do I use my rules to get to this premise, since this is the premise I'm going against? If you are arguing in favor of a premise, copy and paste the premise, put the word therefore in front of it, and that's it. Leave it alone because you're arguing in its favor. So don't put it is not the case that, because then you would be doing the opposite of what you want to be doing. All right, so feel free to email me. We can set up a meeting if you want to. Hopefully this helps with some things that I was seeing that some of you were struggling with. Not all of you, but some of you. Um, and stay in communication. Don't give up. I know it's frustrating, but let's keep working on it together.